Krell had spent more nights than he could count watching empty sky. His scout ship drifted through a thin lane of space, where trade lanes had once been busy. Now there was only quiet, and the slow hiss of old machines. Krell knew the maps by memory. He knew which stars kept silence, and which still had voices. He had never heard a human voice. Humans were a story on the old nets, a map note on the edge of many systems. People spoke of them like they spoke of storms, something that had happened long ago and changed some things forever. Krell had heard those stories and never felt more than curiosity. The galaxy kept its distance from Earth now. Earth was small. Earth was odd. That was the end of it. Then the signal arrived. It came like a small knock inside the listening net. Krell felt it first in his chest, a cold little alarm, like the beating of a trapped bird. The ship's receivers caught a plain string of sounds. The translation software ran over and over. Lines of text came up on the screen. For a moment, Krell thought it was a mistake. The message was short. It was not a call for help. It was not a plea. We will not stop. Those words sat on the screen like a stone. They were simple. They were clear. They were not open to much guessing. Krell watched his own face in the reflection on the console. His hands were steady, but his breath felt too loud. He sent the clip to the ship's captain with the same calm he had used on many routine days. The captain did not move at first. He listened and then asked for more data. Machines combed through the static and pulled more of the signal out of the background noise. The new pieces came in like someone taking the rings off a hand, small, fast, final. A name appeared, a short list of coordinates, a pattern in the timing that the machines flagged as intentional. The captain's orders were quick and old as fear. Burn the tapes, he said. Do not decode further. Leave. Do not carry this. Krell felt the order in his bones. He had been told many times that some things were dangerous to know. He had been taught how to follow orders. He had also been taught to listen well. The human voice on the screen had a weight that did not belong to myth. It carried a kind of promise that set the mind to turning over questions like stones. He should have obeyed. He almost did. Instead, Krell hid a copy. He copied the raw file into a sealed memory and tucked it into the ship's maintenance bank. He wrote over the visible tape with old hunting logs and sent a brief, calm message back to the captain. Data gone. Leaving the lane. The ship's engines pushed them out of the lane and into a quieter path. Other ships noticed nothing. Other crews went on with the work of moving goods and watching the usual nets. But Krell did not sleep. He kept his eyes on the hidden memory. He replayed the short line until the words lost their shape and became only a sound. Each time, the timing between words seemed to change to him. Each time, the machines suggested new meanings. The name in the message, Mira, kept coming up in the decoded files. It was a human name. It had weight. Krell tried to think of what he knew about Mira. The nets held broken histories. Stories of a woman who had fought, a woman who had lost, a woman who might have been a voice among many. The memory did not explain. It hinted. The hint was enough to make his mouth dry. He was not the only one to pick up the signal. Far away, in a small settlement that had once traded with Earth, a woman called Lysa listened on a dish built by her father. She had used human parts to make it. When the broadcast reached her, she felt old fear climb her spine. She thought of promises broken and debts unpaid. She folded her hands and sent a quiet alert through the market net. Messages crossed systems like sparks. Merchants, hunters, and diplomats felt the pull differently. Some saw danger and closed their doors. Some saw chance and sharpened their knives. The short human line that meant so little by itself began to make a shape in many minds. It became a ledger, a warning, a promise. Krell knew what the captain feared. He also feared what would happen if the message was left buried. He thought of small worlds that still used human machines. He thought of families who had lost things to the trade deals of long ago. He thought of the weight of a human voice, saying a simple, final thing. One night, when the stars outside the hole looked like scattered dust, Krell took the sealed memory and played more of it. A longer clip resolved from the static. A voice spoke, in rough, honest tones. It was human and tired. It said a name. It named places. It named people. It said, "We will not stop," then added a line that pulled the hair on the back of Krell's neck straight up. We were not alone. No more. Krell pressed his palm flat against the console. He had been a careful listener. He had not been a man of action. He had kept quiet for years to keep his ship and his crew safe. But something inside him had changed. The words on the screen felt like an order not to him, but to the galaxy. He thought of the small settlements that still trusted human parts. He thought of Lysa's dish and the markets that would wake. He could delete the hidden memory. He could obey the captain and sleep again. He could remove the spark and keep his life neat. Or he could do something else. Krell did not let himself think in circles. He breathed in, tasted the stale air, and moved his hand to the transmit key. He knew the danger. He knew the consequences could sweep across more than his ship. He also knew the truth of what he had heard. The key under his finger was a simple thing. It could throw a stone into a long, dry field. He pressed the key. The hidden copy left the scout in a thin silver pulse. It moved along old trade routes and underground nets. Krell watched the lines on his screen ripple outward. He did not know how many would hear. He only knew that, for the first time in a long time, the quiet sky had been touched by noise that would not go away. Tal had spent his life taking what others left behind. His ship smelled of oil and old metal. He liked work that came with risk. He liked work that paid now. When a short clip flicked across his bridge, the same human line Krell had sent, he did not feel the cold that others felt. He felt a sharpened edge. The words were small. The meaning was not, "We will not stop." To a hunter like Tal, those words meant movement. They meant purpose. They meant profit for those who could move first. The clip had come through a dozen channels at once. Krell's hidden copy had jumped old trade nets and rumor feeds. It found listening dishes and privateers. Lysa's market net showed it in a soft alert. A diplomat saw it in her quiet inbox. A merchant in a spinning city saw it on a trading board. Each reader read the same short sentence, but each heart turned it into a different thing. In the high glass tower, the diplomat named Soren pushed the clip into the council's stream. He spoke with careful words and slow hands. "We do not know their aim," he told the council. "We only know their voice. We must stay calm. We must not burn what we do not understand." Soren believed in treaties and maps. He believed words were tools. He hoped words could build stops. But other voices in the council were louder. An old admiral slammed her palm on the table and said, "If Earth speaks like this, we strike first." Another delegate whispered about hidden engines and surprise attacks. The council split into two halves, like a board cut in wind. The short phrase had become a reason to fear and a reason to act. The diplomat fought to hold both hands steady and failed to hold the room. In the markets, merchants did not meet in glass rooms. They met over cups and shared ledgers. They remembered the engines they had bought from Earth long ago. They remembered the systems that had traded human art and human metal for favors and routes. When the human name Mira and the short list of coordinates began to arrive on their boards, merchants felt old debts press them. Some wanted to hide, some wanted to buy protection. One old merchant, Jex, shut his ledger and nodded to his clerk. He pulled an old human sensor from beneath his stall and wiped dust off the casing, as if waking a sleeping friend. On the fringe worlds, old machines still slept in ruins. An engineer named Rael had a small shop full of human parts. He had been a trader once. He had used human tech to fix clocks, to build small listening dishes, to help fishing boats find their way. When Krell's copy hit Ral's dish, A sound came through that made his hands stop. The old parts hummed. Rao moved with careful fingers. He knew the feel of human metal. He had sold pieces to many. Now he fit them together again and pointed them to the sky. When the reassembled sensor woke, it gave more than one line. It pulled a longer pattern out of the static and showed a list of places. The list matched old trade posts and museum worlds. It matched places with human relics. Rao's dish fed the data to a small net of friends. The friends read, and then read again. They had been small parts in older deals. Some had lost households. Some had lost names. The signal had not begged. It had named. Tal watched the markets and the council and the tiny lights on his own map. He did not care for treaties or long arguments. He cared for what moved. He liked machines that told him where the prize slept. The human signal had given such a map, even if it had hidden lines. To a hunter, any map was an invitation. He called his crew to the small briefing room. The crew were lean and quick. They read the list and felt the same pull. One place on the map shone brighter than the rest, a cluster of small worlds and scrap moons where human relics had been left and forgotten. Old engine parts, trading jars, broken sensors, many things that could be worth much on the right. Market. Tal smiled without joy. He set a course. Not everyone moved so fast. In a small home far from fleets, a woman named Rhea watched the feeds and worried about her child. She remembered stories of humans being proud and stubborn. She remembered a neighbor's farm sold for a human engine, and the nights the child had cried when the engine broke. She closed the shutters and held her child's hand. For many, the clip was a ghost that woke old fears and old debts. Messages doubled and tripled across systems. Traders called for guards. Governors closed their ports. A few went further. They sent armed ships toward the places named by the signal. They wanted control of the story. The signal had become a ledger in some minds and a threat in others. People started to make choices. Back among the ruins, Rao's reawakened sensors picked up another thing, a faint, regular pulse under the static. It was not like a voice. It was like a slow heartbeat in the bones of an old machine. Rao frowned. He had dug up many things. He had never heard a wake like this. He sent the note to a friend who worked with salvage law. That friend sent it on. The pulse moved like a secret across lines. The diplomat Soren watched the movement and felt the room close like a trap. He warned others that panic would only make the signal worse. "Let us ask for proof," he said. "Let us send scholars. Let us not burn towns because of a short sentence." But words have little weight when fear makes pockets heavy. Hunters tightened their ropes. Merchants secured vaults. The old nets split into groups that would hide. Groups that would sell their arms to whoever paid, and groups that would strike first. Trust thinned. Tal did not wait to decide. He brought his ship out of the docks and pushed for open space. His crew were ready. They had engines rebuilt from human parts and a small device that hummed like a sleeping animal. Tal pointed toward the scrapped cluster and gripped the wheel. Behind him, somewhere under the skin of a quiet moon, the pulse Ral had found began to change. It picked up a new beat. Machines on dead lists woke an eyelid. A slow, old thing that had been kept in treaty silence began to stir. Tal's ship leaped into night. The map line that led to human relics flashed. A new sound rose in the dark. Not the human voice, but something older. The hunters smelled it first, then the markets, then the diplomats. The signal had done more than spread fear. It had touched something that lay sleeping in the rubble, and the galaxy took a breath. It did not know, it could not hold. Teams moved like careful hands across the old worlds. They came in small ships and rusted barges, in cargo liners and quiet skiffs. Each team had a reason. Scholars wanted to read names. Scavengers wanted parts. Governments wanted proof. The Places they searched were full of memory-broken domes, half-buried engines, museums with empty pedestals. The air there tasted like old promises. It smelled of salt and iron and the dust from long, quiet rooms. One dig team worked in a museum that had once displayed human tools. The building had been looted years before and then sealed. Now their lights cut through the dark and dust hung in the air like slow stars. A young tech named Holly moved with slow care. He brushed a wooden box and found a small brass lock. The lock was not like war machines. It felt like a letter seal, something people used when they wanted a message to be private. But honest, they opened it. Inside was a recording device wrapped in worn cloth. It bore a human mark. Holly's hands trembled when he switched it on. The room filled with a voice that was not a machine's blunt hum. It was soft but steady. It breathed like a person who had been awake too long. "My name is Myra," the voice said. "If you find this, listen. We could not hold what was taken. We tried to leave. We found they had taken more than goods. They took names. They took records. They made promises that were empty. We could not stop what they did to us. We can only tell you now, so you know the cost." The dig team went quiet. Even the radios lowered their hiss. Mira's voice was not a commander's shout. It was a tired speech. It told a simple story of trade that turned to theft, of bargains that broke, of families that lost land and tools to deals that had no mercy. Her voice named places and people. It named systems that had once bought human machines and then sold their owners out in secret. Holly replayed the end of the clip, and the screen showed something else, a pattern hidden in the pauses. The machines flagged that pattern as a key. It acted like a lock code the devices had used to hide other lines of the message. One of the scholars on the team, old and steady, said, "This is not just a warning. This is a ledger. It lists what was taken. It lists who took it." News of the recording moved faster than any ship. The merchant at a nearby port found the clip in a trade channel. A salvage captain in a rusted freighter heard it on a private net and felt his stomach tighten because his ledger had names on it. A small town that had once fixed human sensors closed its shutters when the list named their council head. In a low valley, under broken antennae, Ral and his friends listened to a copy of the recording on a scratch-built speaker. Ral had buried human parts under his workbench. He had sold some pieces and kept others because they were useful and because he liked to remember a different time, when Mira named a commander who had once taken a village's water pumps in exchange for an engine. Ral's hands clenched and he felt old shame mix with new anger. The dig teams did not only find voices, they found things. A crate opened to show a child's drawing pressed between maps, a case of lenses still fogged with salt. A small machine hummed when Holly picked it up. It had a simple faceplate and a soft light. The scholar who read the machine's tag smiled sadly and said, "These were gifts, not weapons. They were stolen for trade and then traded again like coins." The more teams listened, the more names the ledger gave. Names of buyers, names of port managers, names of trading houses. Each name was a small stone dropped into a quiet pool. Ripples spread. Families checked each other. Old allies read the list and felt their guilt like heat on their skin. Some denied. Some paid quietly and hoped no one noticed. But the recording had done what a single clear human voice can do. It cut across excuses and laid out facts. Then, far from the museum lights, someone saw a small craft slip between ruined towers. It looked like a ghost from older stories, paint, flaked numbers half worn away. The craft landed near a pile of salvaged parts, and a hatch hissed open. A figure stepped out and moved with the sure slow pace of someone who had lived through too many hard days. She carried nothing heavy. She held a small box close to her chest. Mira. She had walked the paths the record spoke of. She had watched the machine's wake when the recording played. She had listened to the way names burned in people's minds. She had learned to move like a memory, not like an army. When she reached the market that night, she did not shout. She did not ask for soldiers. She looked at the faces of people who had once been sold, and she told them their names. She spoke slowly and plainly, and every person who heard felt the ledger in their hands. The quiet chain, the covert group that had acted like a net, had eyes and ears. They tracked names and moved like cold threads through the market. They had been watching for a way to catch Mira and to silence the noise. They thought she would be careful. They thought she would hide in ruins. She did not. As Mira walked through the crowd, someone reached out and grabbed her sleeve. Hands closed. The quiet chain's nets dropped like metal flowers, and a dozen soldiers moved in. For a moment, it seemed Myra might be taken in secret, like other secrets. The soldiers did not know the weight of the recording she carried. Myra had a small device. She pressed it, and the market screens blinked. Every public feed in the city came to life. Old records, receipts, routes, names, everything the ledger held played across the glass towers and the vendor stalls. The quiet chain's files were on the screens too. Evidence of past deals, secret orders, and private messages burned like thin paper. The crowd changed. The singer on the corner stopped and watched the glass. The merchant froze with a coin in his hand. The quiet chain's soldiers hesitated. A single voice in the crowd rose like a reed, and then became many voices that shouted names and dates. People who thought their debts were hidden stepped into the light dot in the market. The nets closed and opened like breath. Soldiers reached for Mira and the ledger device. Mira stood very still. She did not look scared. She looked tired. Her voice did not rise. She said, "Listen, pay what you owe." At the edge of the market, one of the salvage teams sent a small ping to a distant friend. The friend answered with a short note. "There is movement under the ruins. An old engine woke. Wake sensors are active." The market noise faltered. On the screens, a thin blinking line started to move, a heartbeat, not from a human, but from metal that had slept too long. Alarms began to blink in small rooms across several planets. The old machines had heard the ledger and had some small, slow memory left. The city's lights changed color. Somewhere under stone and treaty, a buried thing pulled at its chains. The crowd's chanting cut short as a new sound rose, a low mechanical thrum that had not been heard for generations. The market fell into a silence that was not peace. My hand tightened around the device. The ledger's light pulsed once, and in the deep dark under the museum, something that had been meant to never wake opened an eye. News of Mira's recording moved like fire through dry grass. Traders showed the list to each other. Diplomats passed copies under their breath. Small towns that had once trusted human engines read the names and sat very still. The ledger did more than name who had taken things. It named who had lied. It named who had signed false papers. The ledger became a coin everyone wanted or feared. In tall council halls, Soren argued for slow work and careful proof. He stood at a clear desk and spread out maps. "We must not burn ourselves on fear," he said. "We must ask for facts." Many listened. Many did not. The list made private deals public. Old promises that had lived behind closed doors came into the sun. Merchants used the ledger as leverage. Some tried to buy their way out. Some sold protection to those on the list. Old debts were offered as currency. The ledger spoke of goods taken, but it also listed where the goods had gone. That meant many people had to answer. In one market, a merchant named Jax found his name on the ledger. He had thought his old deals were forgotten. Now people who had lost farms or homes pointed at his name. Jax's hands shook. He could not sleep. The quiet chain moved like a net across nets. They were a group of men and women who believed stability came from silence. To them, a single human voice could topple balances that took generations to build. They saw Mira as a danger that must be cut out. They used long fingers in trade routes, secret police, and bought silence. When the ledger named a city governor, who had taken more than he was allowed, the quiet chain decided to act. They set a trap. They watched markets where Mira might appear. They fed certain stories into gossip channels. They hired a few old soldiers to close ways out. Their plan was clean and cold. Catch Mira in public, take her quietly, then erase the ledger. Quiet chain leaders believed the fewer who saw the books, the safer the peace. Mira moved like a woman who had kept her anger small so she could carry it farther. She walked through markets with no guard. She spoke to small crowds and read names aloud. She did not ask for weapons. She asked for truth. People who had once been sold sat in the stalls and listened. When Mira read a name a father had spoken in secret, that father felt something lift and then tremble. Some wept. Some stood and fought back with words. The quiet chain waited until Mira stepped between crowded stalls on a busy day. Then the net closed. Soldiers poured from shadowed lanes. They moved like quick fingers. For a moment it seemed Mira would be taken into a private ship. The quiet chain thought they had the night for their plan. Mira held her small box close. Her face showed a hard kind of kindness. She pressed a small key. The market screens lit. In that instant, the city saw the ledger. Every public feed showed the proofs, receipts, messages, signed papers, orders. The quiet chain's own actions flashed on the same screens: payments, secret orders, old arrests. The crowd saw the truth. Silence broke like glass. People who had thought their losses were private found proof in plain sight. A vendor pointed at a name on a screen. "That is my son," she cried. A banker saw his ledger and went pale. Soldiers glanced at the growing crowd and hesitated. The quiet chain's leaders tried to cut the feeds. They tried to seize the screens. But the ledger was already moving through other nets. People in other cities saw the same evidence. Supports grew like new light. Merchants who once bought silence now stood in the square and shouted for the governor's head. Diplomats who had feared war found a new public power to use. The quiet chain's careful plan unraveled in plain sight. Myra did not smile. She only said clear and low, "Pay what you owe." Her voice did what the ledger could not do alone. It called for names to be returned, for goods moved back, for apologies made public. People began to help. Those who had kept secrets now found themselves in open streets. Far from the market, the quiet chain's leaders watched the feeds turn against them. One old officer banged his fist on a table and swore. "Find her," he said. "Find the device." They moved ships. They called in mercenaries. They believed force could turn truth back into shadow. But the ledger had already touched too many small things. Old engines were passed into hands that knew them. Lawyers and scholars read records and found legal ways to force payments. Merchants used their old credits to buy back goods and to pay small settlements. People who once feared the quiet chain now walked in the light and named the men who had scolded them for asking. In the chaos, something else was happening. The recording had done more than reveal names. It had woken memory in metal. Machines that had slept under treaty lines felt the ledger's light and began small tests. On a treaty world, engineers watching the feeds felt a faint pulse come from a buried machine they had all thought dead. At salvage yards, workers who had repaired human parts felt a change in their tools. The ledger's spread had pulled at parts that remembered how they had been used. Soren realized this too late. He watched the clocks and felt panic on his skin. "The list sees names, they are keys," he said. "They are not only truth, they open old systems." He sent messages to every treaty office he could reach. He asked for holds, for safety checks, for scholars. His voice was small in the council halls full of angry men and women. Under the city, where Mira had spoken, men in quiet chain ships tried to find the ledger device. They cut power to streets and sent soldiers into the markets. They wanted to take the box and the woman who had forced open the secrets. The market thinned as people fled, clutching proofs and memories. Mira stepped away from the crowd and into a narrow lane. Her small box pulsed once in her hand. Above them, in a buried vault, far older than the treaty lines, something began to move. It was not loud at first. It sounded like a clock with a large, slow hand. In the vault, a relay warmed. In its logs, a count that had not ticked for decades started to mark time. On screens across the city, the faint pulse flared into a slow, steady beat. Engineers who had spent years keeping such things quiet felt the air change, a light in one small control room went from green to thin orange. A message scrolled across a hidden console. Countdown started. Mira heard nothing but the quiet of the lane. She looked at the small box, then at the dark mouth of the vault where the old engine slept. She understood, in a clean, hard way, that the ledger did not only ask for justice, it had pulled at something that was meant to be buried. The quiet. Chained soldiers closed in from both ends of the lane. Their boots sounded like small hammers. The market's distant shouts faded. In the deep under the vault, a mechanical breath counted a number in a language of clicks and thin lights. Mira took one long breath and held the ledger box close. The countdown kept moving. The sound of the countdown was thin at first. It was a small tick that came from far below the city. People heard it like a clock in a quiet house. The tick moved through wires and pipes. It woke relay rooms and old servants built of metal. The machines read the ledger, and the ledger read the machines. Time moved with a new weight. Myra stood in the narrow lane and felt the tick like a footstep behind her. Soldiers closed in. The quiet chain wanted the device, and they wanted her. But the city was not the same as it had been the day before. Screens still showed the proof. People had seen the names. The small crowd that first gathered had not all fled. Some stayed. Some had brought old papers and receipts. Some had brought small human tools they had hidden for years. Soren moved through the crowd like a man carrying wet maps. He had used council power to open channels and to call for help. He knew treaties and codes. He also knew that laws alone could not stop an engine. He offered what he had, calls to treaty offices, to salvage teams, to engineers who still kept old keys. He sent messages and begged the machines that ran ports to hold ships at bay. TAHL stood by the harbor, hands on rough metal. His crew were ready. They had old engines fixed with human parts. They had something else too. Courage that came from being small and fast. Tal did not trust treaties. He trusted movement. He said, "If we must go where the machine waits, we go fast." He pointed at a route that cut under guarded zones. "It will be quiet. It will be risky, but it will work." Jex the merchant walked between angry men and scared families. His name had been on the ledger. He had taken out his old ledgers and pressed them into hands that had once been empty. Now he used what he had to help. He paid pilots, bribed a few closed gates, and did what merchants do when they cannot trade. He made a plan. Ral and Holly worked in a small room beneath the museum. They had the skills to talk with old machines. They had taught themselves to read the old code like a new language. Ral cleaned the faceplate of a small reader. "This device listens to truth," he said quietly. "If we feed the machine, the ledger, with the right voice, it will stop the thing that counts. It will answer record with record." Holly's hands shook. He had found Mira's recordings and burned copies into a stack of old drives. They fed those drives into a small crate and sealed it. The plan was messy. It had to be. They could not ask for a parade. The quiet chain watched like a net. The treaty offices moved slow. So they chose 3 things at once: public truth, a fast ship, and Mira's voice. Soren opened the public channels. He told the truth in clear words. The ledger lists names and records. The galaxy could use law to force returns. People in many cities heard him. Many felt shame. Many chose to help. Tal took a fast crew and followed a route under old trade lanes. They used human engines to slip past sensors. Jex paid for the fastest tug to carry a crate of records. Ral and Holly joined, with a quiet team of salvage hands and scholars. Mira came too. She would not be left behind. Quiet chain ships tried to cut them off. They sent blocks and tried to catch the convoy. A small battle started above a ruined ring. Tal's ship danced like a hawk. Small weapons spat fire, and the sky lit with quick white lines. The convoy lost one cargo arm, and a pilot bled, but they moved. People on the ground watched and some prayed. The sound of engines and the taste of smoke made the city feel like it had more life than before. Under the vault, the machine counted down. Its voice was not a human voice. It was clicks and cold tones. It had rules inside it, older than treaties. It had been set to balance debt and to punish theft. It had once been a judge on metal legs. When the ledger showed names, the machine began to read them and to match them with records. The crate reached the vault. Ral and Holly ran with the small reader. Mira stepped up to the machine's faceplate. The machine wanted proof. Mira's voice was tired but steady. She placed the box on the machine's teeth, an old slot that had not been used in generations. The reader unlocked, and the machine drank the ledger like a thirsty program. One by one, the names and receipts played out into its memory. The machine checked its files. It found matches. It found gaps. It began to act not like a weapon, but like an old clerk forced to face the truth. It slowed. The countdown tick moved like a breath. Yet the quiet chain would not make this easy. They sent a strike team into the vault. They fired, and the air answered with metal. Sparks climbed like quick fireflies. Harley's hand was nicked. Ral's sleeve caught smoke. Tal and his crew fought outside and above. The market chimed, and the crowd below roared for the convoy. People had seen the fight, and they would not be quiet. Myra did not run. She pressed, her voice to a simple thing, names. She read them aloud. She spoke slowly. Each name was a small truth. The machine, with its old laws, needed truth. It needed record. It could not take more than what laws allowed when the laws were true. The more names Myra read, the more the machine's logic bent away from war. At a moment the vault's main relay blinked. The countdown stopped. The tick became a single long tone and then went silent. In halls across the city, lights changed, from thin orange to steady green. Engineers dropped tools and breathed. The quiet chains, soldiers froze. They had not expected the ledger to do what it did. They had thought force would win. Instead, truth did. Mira stepped back. The ledger device grew cold in her hands. She looked at the faces around Hertel, Soren, Ral, Jex, Holly, and the small crowd that had risked everything. None of them cheered. They were too tired. But some smiled, small and raw. After the machine paused, the work began. Records had to be checked. Names called. Payments ordered. People who had taken had to answer. The quiet chain tried to flee. Some leaders were found and tied to public posts. Others went into hiding. The markets opened and goods moved back. Small towns received engines returned. Old debts were paid with coin and work and apologies. Mira did not ask for glory. She wanted the ledger to do its job. She wanted names to be spoken. She wanted people to know what had been taken. The camera feeds showed towns getting water pumps back. They showed men giving keys to women whose houses had been lost. Change moved like a slow tide. In the days after, councils met and wrote new rules. They set places where records would be kept and read. They banned secret cells that took names. They built small public rooms where ledgers could be read by anyone. The galaxy did not become perfect. People still lied. People still cheated. But the last signal from Earth had made one thing clear. Small voices can bend great machines. Truth can stop a counted gun. Mira walked away from the vault with the small box empty. She had done what she needed. She did not look for thanks. She looked for a child on the harbor who had lost his toy and had it returned by a man who used to sell engines. The child laughed. The sky was not the same. It held new rules, new debts paid, and a quiet that felt like a promise. The last signal from Earth had been a threat to those who took without thought. To those who suffered, it was a promise kept. The galaxy learned to count names and to listen.